The Galactic Senate was an institution built on ancient wisdom, forged through centuries of interstellar cooperation and conquest. Comprised of representatives from countless species, it stood as the unchallenged authority over the known galaxy. From its ivory towers on the distant world of Lexer Prime, the Senate decreed laws, brokered alliances, and waged wars, all with the belief that its superior civilizations held the galaxy's balance of power. But that was before humanity emerged from the cradle of Earth. The Senate had taken little notice of Earth's slow crawl into the stars. The humans, they believed, were little more than an oddity, a species that barely understood the complexities of interstellar politics or galactic warfare. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, and their fragile biology seemed ill-suited for the demands of deep space exploration. To the Senate, humans were little more than a passing curiosity, destined to be swallowed up by the vast and ruthless universe. But something had shifted. Admiral Lena Voss stood in the Senate's grand chamber, the heavy weight of centuries of intergalactic history pressing down upon her. She wasn't there by choice. Earth had not been invited. No human ever was. Yet, through an unspoken alliance of necessity, she found herself seated at the table among species far older and more powerful than any human could imagine. Before her, a hologram of the Senate's spokesbeing, a towering insectoid called Ilok, the primary representative of the Aurelians, flickered to life. Ilok's compound eyes narrowed as he addressed the assembly with his usual icy confidence. "We have watched your rise, Earthlings, but your time has yet to come. Your ships may traverse the stars, but your systems are nothing compared to ours. The Senate has decided. Humanity's place in the galaxy is one of obedience, not leadership." The room fell into a tense silence. To most of the Senate members, the words felt familiar. It was a proclamation of their superiority, an assertion that no species could truly challenge their dominance. But to Lena Voss, it was an insult. Her fingers clenched around the armrests of her chair. The Earth fleet had spent years developing technology capable of navigating hostile space, improving upon alien blueprints, and crafting weapons that could take down even the most imposing adversary. To have it dismissed in a single sentence was more than just offensive. It was a declaration of war. She leaned forward, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "If you truly believe humanity is not worthy of respect, then you've made a grave mistake. We will prove you wrong." Ilok's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Prove us wrong. We have seen empires rise and fall, and yet none have dared challenge us. Your primitive technology, your so-called fleet, is no match for what we have created." Voss stood, her tall form unwavering. "Perhaps, but the strength of humanity isn't in the size of our ships or the might of our weapons. It's in our will. We will do what others thought impossible." A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. Some species, like the Ulyshians, a race of calm, philosophical beings, merely watched with quiet curiosity. Others, like the Ilksi, their sleek, predatory forms gleaming, sneered at the audacity of a species they had once considered a non-threat. "I'll remind you, Admiral," Ilok continued, "the Senate governs over the galaxy. Your people may have made impressive strides, but they remain insignificant in the grand scheme." Lena's eyes burned with the weight of the challenge. "Then I suggest you prepare yourself for a reality where humanity is no longer insignificant." The council erupted into chaos. Some supported her, others jeered, but there was no doubt. The human presence was felt now, like a shadow looming over the Senate. No one could have predicted that the galaxy's most feared empire would now have to reckon with the one force they had never considered a threat: humanity. Admiral Voss left the chamber that day with a quiet sense of resolve. Her fleet was still young, but the gauntlet had been thrown. She would lead Earth's forces into the unknown, into the vast expanse of space where the Senate's prideful grip had faltered. And when the dust settled, the galaxy would understand the true strength of humankind. The first battle was already on the horizon, and humanity's pride, though newly ignited, would never back down. The human fleet was a far cry from the mighty armadas of the Galactic Senate. It was composed of only a dozen ships, sleek and compact, built with Earth's innovative but untested designs. These vessels, unlike the grand behemoths that ruled the galaxy, were constructed with a singular purpose: to outthink, outmaneuver, and survive. Admiral Lena Voss stood at the bridge of the Resolute, her flagship, eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Aurelian system before them. It was a vast network of ancient starships, defensive fortifications, and satellite arrays, an overwhelming display of military prowess. The Aurelians were known throughout the galaxy for their indomitable fighting spirit, their ships nearly impervious to any traditional assault. They had built their empire on strength, on honor, and on their unwavering belief that they were invincible. The human fleet, in comparison, felt almost laughable. There were no towering superstructures or dazzling weapons of mass destruction. What they had was strategy, adaptability, and something the Aurelians would come to learn the hard way: a relentless will to win. "Admiral, they've detected us," reported Lieutenant Ruse, his voice steady despite the obvious tension. "The Aurelian ships are deploying. They're on an intercept course." Voss nodded, her face unwavering. "Steady. Don't engage until we're in range. We need to make them underestimate us." The Aurelians were quick to act. Their ships, colossal in comparison to the humans' fleet, darted toward them with deadly precision. The lead ship, a massive battle cruiser known as the Seraph, fired first, its weapons capable of turning a planet into dust with a single shot. The energy blasts rippled through space, each one closer to their target than the last. The humans were ready. "Now fire at will," Voss commanded, her voice cold and controlled. The Resolute and the rest of the human fleet fired their weapons in perfect synchrony. Instead of the expected large-scale bombardment, the human ships released a torrent of smaller, faster missiles, each one designed not to overwhelm, but to confuse and destabilize. The Aurelian battlecruiser took the bait, focusing its fire on the incoming missiles. But it was too late. The human ships didn't just engage head-on. They used their speed and maneuverability to create chaos. The missiles exploded in timed bursts, each detonation sending shockwaves that disrupted the targeting systems of the Aurelian ships. What the Senate had considered inferior technology was now working to their advantage. For the first time, the Aurelians hesitated. The human fleet didn't just rely on technology, it relied on human ingenuity. As the Resolute darted through the chaos of battle, Voss called for the next phase. "Initiate the decoy protocol," she ordered. The human fleet split into several smaller groups, each one making rapid, unpredictable course changes that scattered the Aurelian forces. It was a tactical maneuver the Aurelians hadn't encountered before. Small, agile targets that moved in erratic patterns, forcing the larger, slower ships to waste their firepower. In the midst of this confusion, human vessels began to strike at the Aurelian weak points. Reactor cores, energy relays, and command systems, striking precise blows where their enemies had never expected. A series of controlled explosions erupted across the Aurelian fleet. One by one, their ships began to falter. The Seraph, the pride of the Aurelian navy, took a direct hit to its starboard reactor. Its hull cracked open, exposing its fragile innards to the vacuum of space. The human fleet had crippled their opponents, but it wasn't over. The Aurelians were no cowards. Their warriors began to board human vessels in an attempt to engage in direct combat, fighting hand-to-hand with the crew. The corridors of the Resolute became a battleground as humans and Aurelians clashed in brutal, close-quarters combat. Voss, watching the chaos unfold on her ship's monitors, gave a sharp command to her crew. "Activate the sentries. We end this now." A series of automated defenses activated across the fleet. Turrets, energy fields, and force barriers all went online in unison, forcing the Aurelians to retreat from the human vessels. The remaining Aurelian ships began to fall back, their once proud formations now disarrayed, and in retreat. As the dust settled, the humans stood victorious. The Aurelian fleet had been shattered. Voss stood at the helm of the Resolute, looking out into the aftermath of the battle. She knew this victory was only a taste of what would come. It wasn't just a military win. It was a message. The Senate would know that humanity could no longer be dismissed. The galaxy would learn that human ingenuity and will were forces to be reckoned with. "Prepare for the next phase," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new weight. The Senate would not go unchallenged. The Aurelians would not be the last to learn what happens when you underestimate humanity. And now, the galaxy knew. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were winning. The news of humanity's victory over the Aurelians spread like wildfire across the galaxy, igniting a flurry of activity throughout the once imposing Galactic Senate. It wasn't just the Senate that took notice. Smaller, once silenced voices from the farthest reaches of space began to whisper. The less powerful alien races, who had long endured the oppressive rule of the Senate, now saw a glimmer of hope. Humanity had done what no one else had dared, challenged the Aurelians, and lived to tell the tale. Admiral Lena Voss, standing on the observation deck of the Resolute, watched as the stars stretched out before her. She could feel the weight of the galaxy shifting. She had known the battle had been crucial, but she hadn't anticipated the ripple effect it would create. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Ruse, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've received a transmission. Secure, encrypted. It's from a race called the Isheri. They are requesting a meeting." The name was unfamiliar to Voss. The Isheri were a nomadic species, known to live on the outskirts of galactic civilization. They were a peaceful people, rarely involved in intergalactic politics, and they had always been neutral, avoiding conflict at all costs. But after the Aurelian defeat, it seemed they were ready to take a different stance. "Put it through," Voss ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing a tall, elegant figure, a female Isheri, with silver skin that shimmered faintly like the surface of a moonlit lake. Her piercing green eyes, full of intelligence, held the gaze of the Admiral as she spoke. "Admiral Voss, we have watched your victory with great interest. It is rare for a race to defy the Senate's will, and even rarer for them to succeed. We are intrigued by your people." Voss tilted her head, not entirely trusting the tone in the Isheri's voice. "I didn't expect an invitation from you, much less after a battle with the Aurelians. What do you want?" The Isheri ambassador's smile was enigmatic. "What we want is simple. We want to ensure our survival. The Senate has long kept us on the fringes, refusing to recognize our sovereignty. And while we have managed to remain neutral, we are not blind to the shifting tides of power. The Aurelians may be formidable, but they are not invincible. We seek an alliance with your people. An alliance that would guarantee our protection, and perhaps yours, should the Senate turn their attention to you." Voss paused, her mind working quickly. She had known that humanity's victory would stir something in the galaxy, perhaps an uprising, perhaps an awakening. But this was something she hadn't expected. The Isheri were no small fish. They controlled vast stretches of space along the outer rim, their ships fast and stealthy, capable of navigating areas of space that even the Senate could not. A partnership with them would provide humanity with the means to disrupt the Senate's control. "Why now?" Voss asked. "Why not before?" The Isheri's expression softened, her voice quieter. "Because we were waiting to see if your people had the courage to challenge the status quo. We didn't trust that you would succeed. But now we see you are capable of more than mere survival. You have the potential to reshape this galaxy." Voss's eyes narrowed as she considered the offer. The Isheri were a powerful ally, and they knew how to move in the shadows of galactic politics. This alliance could provide humanity with a network of support that could unravel the Senate's grip on the galaxy, but it also carried risks. No one aligned with the Senate could be trusted, and the Isheri, despite their calm exterior, were no strangers to manipulating others for their own ends. "We'll need time to think," Voss said finally, her voice steady. "But I'll send word once we've made our decision. I assume you're prepared for the consequences of choosing to ally with humanity." The HFY ambassador nodded, her smile now almost predatory. "We've survived much worse, Admiral. Do not mistake our neutrality for weakness. We will stand with you when the time comes." As the transmission ended, Voss turned to her crew. The room was filled with hushed murmurs as they processed the conversation. The implications were enormous. An alliance with the HFY could accelerate humanity's influence across the galaxy, but it could also make them enemies of the Senate. One thing was clear: humanity's moment was here, and they could no longer remain in the shadows. "Prepare for potential negotiations," Voss ordered. "We're not just fighting a battle. We're preparing for a war. And if we're going to win, we'll need every ally we can get." As the crew began to make preparations, Voss allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Aurelians had been only the beginning. The Senate had made their mistake by underestimating humanity, and now the balance of power was shifting in their favor. The galaxy would never be the same again. The human fleet had barely settled into their new role as a rising force in the galaxy when the next challenge arrived. The Senate, embarrassed by the Aurelian defeat and wary of the growing human influence, saw the need to act swiftly. Rather than engage in another direct military confrontation, they decided to approach humanity through diplomacy, an arena they believed themselves to be far more adept at. The Senate sent its most persuasive envoy, Zorak, a diplomat from the Karu, a species renowned for their intelligence and their ability to manipulate political landscapes with a few carefully chosen words. Zorak was not a warrior. He was a tactician, a master of the subtle art of persuasion, able to convince even the most stubborn species to see things his way. The Senate believed that with his expertise, he could quell the growing storm that was humanity. Zorak's arrival on Earth was a carefully orchestrated event. His ship, a sleek, elongated vessel, entered Earth's orbit amidst a fanfare of pomp and circumstance. To the human public, this felt like a momentous occasion. The Senate was finally acknowledging them, no longer dismissing them as insignificant, but instead sending their finest diplomat to negotiate peace. Admiral Lena Voss, however, knew better. The Senate's gesture was a calculated move, one that sought to make humanity feel small, to remind them of their place. She had dealt with manipulative tactics before. Now, she would face them head-on. In a secure, highly guarded chamber aboard the Resolute, Voss and Zorak met face-to-face. The alien diplomat was tall, his long, sinewy body adorned in ceremonial robes that shimmered like liquid silver. His face, framed by the elegant curves of his skull, was calm and unreadable, his dark eyes piercing through the dim light. "Admiral Voss," Zorak began, his voice smooth and composed, "I am honored to be here. The Senate recognizes the remarkable achievements of humanity. It is only fitting that we open a dialogue. For the good of all, we must put aside differences and embrace cooperation." Voss stood with her arms crossed, her gaze unwavering. "Cooperation? You mean subjugation? Let's not play games, Zorak. The Senate wants us to bend the knee, to accept our place in the galaxy. I'm not interested in being your pawn." Zorak's smile didn't falter. Such bluntness. Admirable, if not a bit reckless. "But I understand your position, Admiral. The Senate merely seeks a mutual understanding. Your fleet has proven itself resilient. Yet it remains far from the capabilities of more established powers. The Senate can offer knowledge, resources, protection, everything you could ever need to ensure your continued existence in this galaxy." Voss didn't flinch. "At a cost. You would keep humanity in your shadow, offering crumbs while keeping the majority of power to yourselves. How typical of the Senate. I'm not interested in your charity." Zorak's eyes glinted with amusement. "You misunderstand, Admiral. The Senate does not offer charity. It offers a partnership. With our help, humanity could ascend to heights you cannot yet comprehend. But this requires trust. Trust in the Senate's wisdom, in the experience of those who have navigated the stars for millennia. You do not yet know what you are capable of. Voss leaned forward slightly. And what do you want in return for this partnership? Zorak's voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with a chilling assurance. Recognition. Acknowledgement. Humanity's place as a subordinate race, working in concert with the Senate, aligned under the collective banner of the Galactic Order. That is all we ask. For a moment, the room was silent. Voss stared at Zorak, weighing his words carefully. She knew this was no offer of true cooperation. It was a thinly veiled ultimatum. To join the Senate's fold would mean submission. The Senate had given their ultimatum to humanity before. And now, they were offering it again, wrapped in the guise of diplomacy. Voss exhaled slowly, her mind racing. You're wrong about one thing, Zorak, she said finally, her voice calm but fierce. We do know what we're capable of, and we don't need the Senate's permission to rise. You underestimate humanity, and that's your greatest mistake. Zorak's expression didn't change, but the faintest flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed his features. You are bold, Admiral, but boldness alone cannot change the balance of power. It cannot make you a force to rival the Senate. You will find that out soon enough. Voss's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. We'll see about that, Zorak. We've already seen that we're more than capable of challenging the galaxy's so-called balance of power. Now, you're going to see what happens when you push humanity into a corner. The Karu diplomat studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, Admiral. We'll see what happens. As Zorak left, Voss stood silently in the chamber, her resolve hardening. The Senate might have thought they could manipulate humanity, but they were wrong. Humanity was not some naive species to be swept aside by the words of a silver-tongued diplomat. They had already proven themselves on the battlefield. Now they would prove themselves in the halls of power. The days following the meeting with Zorak were tense. Humanity's military had successfully pushed the Aurelians back, but now a more dangerous game was unfolding, one of politics, manipulation, and espionage. The Senate had issued its ultimatum, and Voss had rejected it, making it clear that humanity would not bend. But it was not just a matter of military might anymore. Humanity's future now depended on playing the Senate's game, not only with weapons but with alliances and cunning. Admiral Voss knew that humanity couldn't fight the Senate alone. The Isheri had offered an alliance, but the risks were high. The Isheri were a mysterious species known for their shadowy ways and deep-rooted manipulation of galactic politics. Their help could tip the balance in humanity's favor, but only if humanity could trust them. And trust in the galaxy's brutal landscape was a rare commodity. As Voss paced the war room aboard the Resolute, her mind raced. It was time to make a choice. They needed more than just the Isheri. They needed a coalition of like-minded species, those who had suffered under the Senate's rule, and those who sought to break free of its dominance. The question was, how could she unite them without inviting more enemies into humanity's fold? The door to the war room slid open, and Lieutenant Ruse entered, a grave expression on his face. Admiral, we've intercepted another transmission. It's from the Karu. Zorak wants another meeting. Voss didn't need to hear the details to understand what this was. Zorak, the Senate's silver-tongued diplomat, wasn't coming with an olive branch. He was coming with a threat, a reminder that the Senate would not let humanity's defiance go unpunished. Set it up, Voss said, her voice cold. We'll meet him, but this time, we play the game on our terms. A few hours later, Zorak's image flickered to life on the holoscreen. He looked as composed as ever, his silvery robes shimmering in the low light of the chamber. But there was something different about him this time, a tension that was palpable, even through the display. Admiral Voss, he began, his voice calm but edged with a quiet intensity. I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer. The Senate is patient, but not indefinitely so. If humanity persists in its defiance, you will find yourselves outmatched in ways you cannot yet imagine. Voss met his gaze with unwavering confidence. We've already made our decision, Zorak. We're not interested in being a subordinate to the Senate. You underestimate us. We're willing to take on the Senate and your allies. Zorak's lips twisted into a thin smile. Bold words, Admiral. But words are useless in the face of overwhelming force. If you persist in this course, humanity will be crushed, like so many others before you. Voss's expression hardened. Then prepare to be surprised, because we're not alone anymore. Zorak's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Voss thought she saw something resembling uncertainty in his gaze. He regained his composure quickly, but the briefest hint of discomfort passed over him. Very well, he said, his voice colder now. If that is your decision, I will inform the Senate. But know this, alliances can be fickle. You may think you've secured your place in the galaxy, but you've made enemies you can't possibly comprehend. Before Voss could respond, Zorak's image flickered out, leaving the room in a tense silence. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. He was right about one thing. Humanity had made enemies. But that wasn't a reason to back down. In fact, it was the reason to press forward. Prepare for an escalation, Voss said to her team, her voice resolute. The Senate will come at us hard now. They'll use every tactic, every asset they have to undermine us. But we'll be ready. We won't fight alone. She turned to her trusted communications officer. Start sending out feelers to the Isheri. If we can count on them, now is the time to solidify the alliance. And don't stop there. Reach out to the Dalthiri, the Exvora, and any other species that wants to see the Senate's grip broken. Ruiz nodded, his face grim but determined. Understood, Admiral. We'll need a lot of trust to pull this off. We don't have time for trust, Voss replied, her voice steely. We need strength, and we'll find it wherever we can. The game had shifted. Zorak had played his hand, trying to intimidate humanity into submission. But in doing so, he had only shown his true fear, the fear that humanity was not a threat to be extinguished, but a force that could truly unseat the Senate's long-standing rule. The next few days would be crucial. The alliances they forged now would determine whether humanity's future was one of subjugation or one of independence. But one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer just a participant in the galaxy's grand political stage. They were players now, and they weren't going to back down. The war was no longer just a matter of survival. It was about domination, and humanity was ready to take its place as a new power in the galaxy. The first ripple of change came quietly, a single encrypted transmission from the Isheri, followed by coded messages from other fringe species that had long been oppressed, silenced, or ignored by the Galactic Senate. Slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle began to come together. The coalition was forming. Admiral Voss stood at the center of the Resolute's command bridge, overseeing the preparations. The tension was thick, a quiet hum in the air as crew members moved efficiently around her, making final adjustments to their ships, organizing the logistics of the coming storm. Humanity had already proven their ability to fight, but now they would fight with others at their side, with a coalition that could rival the Senate's dominance. The Isheri had responded favorably to the terms, offering their vast network of intelligence and their ability to infiltrate Senate-controlled sectors. But Voss knew the Isheri well enough to understand that there was always a price. They had agreed to fight the Senate's rule, but their true motivations remained unclear. Still, their assets were invaluable. The Dalthiri, a fiercely independent race known for their telepathic abilities and cloaking technology, had pledged their support in exchange for a promise of autonomy. The Exvora, a reptilian species with a deep hatred for the Senate's exploitation of their homeworld, had made their allegiance contingent on the complete removal of Senate forces from their systems. Humanity, though still considered a fledgling power in the galaxy, had somehow united these disparate species under a banner of shared defiance. Voss stepped forward, meeting the eyes of the fleet's senior officers. She could feel the weight of the moment. This was not just a battle for survival. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. We have allies now, but our enemies have not been idle, Voss said, her voice commanding. The Senate will react to this coalition with every resource at their disposal. We cannot afford to be divided. This fight is as much about unity as it is about victory. Lieutenant Ruse, standing to her right, nodded. We've received word from the Ex-Vora. They're ready to move on the Senate-controlled sector of Xenthis. They've been under Senate occupation for decades, and they'll strike first. Voss's gaze hardened. We'll support them. That sector will be a key strategic point if we're going to divide the Senate's forces. If we hit them there, we can disrupt their command structure. Captain Miradane, one of the Resolute's officers, spoke up. We've also received intel from the Isheri. They've identified key Senate fleet movements near the Xenthis system. They're planning a counteroffensive. Voss considered this, her fingers tapping lightly against the console. We don't have the luxury of waiting. The Senate will react with overwhelming force if we give them the chance. It's time to take the fight to them. She turned to the tactical officer. Coordinate with the Isheri and Dalthiri. We'll make our move in 48 hours. We hit the Senate hard, at Xenthis. Then we'll turn to their core systems. We can't afford to be cautious anymore. This is the beginning of the end. The room fell into a tense silence. Each officer, each soldier aboard the Resolute, knew what this meant. They were no longer just defending humanity. They were now an active force in the galaxy's balance of power. The Senate's dominance was not as unshakable as it once seemed. With each ally added to their cause, humanity's chances grew. The galaxy had once been a place where the weak bent to the will of the powerful. But now, humanity had shown the galaxy that they were no longer content to be a footnote in the Senate's history. The Resolute's engines hummed with power as the ship prepared for departure, the war room falling quiet with anticipation. This was no longer about holding their ground. It was about taking back what was theirs and claiming their place in the galaxy. The Senate had underestimated humanity once. They would not make that mistake again. In the depths of space, the storm was gathering. As the coalition of outcasts and rebels readied themselves, the first wave of strikes would ignite a series of events that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. And the Senate would soon learn. Humanity did not fight to survive. Humanity fought to win. The first wave of the coalition's assault struck the Xenthis system like a sudden storm. The Ex-Vora, led by their commander Scar, launched their attack with brutal efficiency. Using their cloaking technology, they infiltrated Senate-controlled space before the enemy had any chance to react. In a single, coordinated strike, they crippled the Senate's military outposts, severing vital communication lines and cutting off reinforcements. Voss watched the operation unfold from the command center of the Resolute. The reports were coming in fast, and each one seemed to confirm what humanity had hoped. This was not a fight they could lose. Xenthis was a key location, a crossroads where Senate fleets frequently passed through, and the strike had sent shockwaves through their command structure. The Senate's military, used to operating with near-total control, was thrown into disarray. Commander Scar reports a 70% success rate on their initial assault. Lieutenant Ruse relayed, his voice steady but betraying a note of awe. They've taken Xenthis Orbital Defense Station and are now pushing toward the capital. Voss leaned over the console, her mind racing. This was the beginning of something huge. If they could secure Xenthis and hold it long enough, they could force the Senate into an untenable position, disrupting their ability to respond effectively. But there were risks. The Senate wouldn't sit idle for long. We need to make sure the Isheri intelligence network is already in place on the other side of Xenthis, Voss said, her voice commanding. We cannot let the Senate regroup or re-establish any supply lines. Cut them off completely. At her orders, the Resolute's fleet began its advance, weaving through the stars toward the next strategic target, a hidden Senate supply depot on the edge of the system. The Ishari had located it just days before, their covert surveillance revealing a crucial weak point in the Senate's defenses. Meanwhile, on the surface of Xenthus, Scar and his forces were wreaking havoc. The Ex-Vora were relentless in their pursuit, tearing through the Senate's defenses with unmatched precision. The native Xenthian population, once kept under tight control by the Senate, rallied to their cause, offering their support and helping to secure key infrastructure. The fight for Xenthus was brutal, but it was clear. The Senate's grip was weakening, and the people of Xenthus saw a new hope in the coalition's arrival. However, not all was as seamless as it appeared. As Voss prepared to launch the next phase of the attack, a message came through from the Ishari command. The Senate had dispatched a rapid response fleet to retake Xenthus, an overwhelming force far greater than anything they had encountered so far. "They've mobilized," Ruiz reported grimly, his eyes scanning the data. "The Senate is not letting this go. We're looking at a full-scale counteroffensive." "Admiral." Voss clenched her jaw, her eyes narrowing. The stakes had just been raised. The Senate would not tolerate the loss of a system like Xenthus. Too many resources, too much political significance. If the Senate sent a fleet of this magnitude, they would stop at nothing to crush this rebellion. "We're not backing down," Voss said, her voice sharp. "We've already taken Xenthus, and we'll hold it. Prepare the fleet for defense. The Ishari need to set up their ambush points, and the Ex-Vora must be ready to move fast. We don't have the luxury of retreat." Ruiz nodded, his expression set in determination. "We'll need to fight smart, Admiral. If they overwhelm us in space, we could lose everything." "We won't let that happen," Voss said, her eyes steely with resolve. "We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We're fighting to win." The Coalition's fleet moved quickly, positioning itself around the planet and setting up defensive formations. As the Senate's fleet approached, the Resolute and its allies braced for a fierce battle. Every ship was aligned for what could be the deciding clash. The ships of the Ishari, sleek and fast, moved in and out of shadow, providing covert strikes against key targets in the Senate fleet. The Ex-Vora's firepower, combined with their expertise in space warfare, began to inflict serious damage on the advancing Senate ships. Humanity's fleet, though not yet as experienced, held its ground with steadfast courage. The battle for Xenthus was about to begin in earnest. Voss stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the stars outside as the enemy fleet came into view. The time for diplomacy was over. Now, it was all about strength, strategy, and the unyielding resolve of a united galaxy. Humanity had taken its first bold steps into the galaxy's center stage. The Senate had made their move to crush them. And now, it was time to show the galaxy who they were truly up against. The battle for Xenthus had escalated into the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever faced. The Senate's rapid response fleet, massive and relentless, bore down on the Coalition's forces, eager to retake the system and crush the rebellion before it could spread further. The void of space between the two forces crackled with the fury of war, blinding bursts of energy, explosions that lit up the blackness like fleeting stars, and the shrill sounds of combat reverberating through the ship's corridors. Admiral Voss stood at the center of the Resolute's command bridge, eyes fixed on the holoscreen, watching the chaotic dance of war unfold. The Senate's fleet was far larger, but the Coalition was faster, more agile, and above all determined. Every shot, every maneuver felt like a desperate stand, a fight not just for Xenthus, but for the future of the galaxy itself. "We've sustained heavy losses on the outer perimeter, Admiral," Lieutenant Ruiz reported, his voice strained. "The Senate's battleships are pushing through our defenses. If they get through, we'll be cut off from our reinforcements." Voss's jaw clenched. They couldn't afford to lose now. This battle wasn't just about Xenthus. It was about the message they were sending to the galaxy. Humanity and its allies were capable of standing up to the Senate, and they would never kneel again. "Pull back the outer forces. Let them think they've gained ground," Voss ordered. Once they've committed, we'll hit them with everything we have. Focus fire on their command ships and fleet leaders. We're going to break their coordination." The tactical officer nodded, relaying the orders. As the Resolute's fleet shifted its strategy, baiting the Senate forces into overextending, a glimmer of hope flickered. The Senate's fleet, eager to reclaim Xanthus, fell into the trap. The Ex-Vora, their ships poised for ambush, opened fire from the shadows, hitting the Senate command ships with precise, devastating shots. At the same time, the Ishari launched a series of covert attacks, disabling key communication relays on the Senate fleet's flagship. The Senate's carefully constructed battle lines unraveled in an instant. The tide was turning. Voss watched as the Senate fleet, now splintered and disoriented, began to fall apart. Their once imposing formations shattered, and now their ships were scattered across the battlefield. Humanity's allies, led by the Resolute, pressed forward with renewed vigor, attacking with brutal efficiency. The Senate's response was chaotic, every move desperate, driven by fear. On the surface of Xanthus, the resistance forces, bolstered by local civilians and the Coalition's fighters, pressed forward, securing the planet from Senate occupation. The once impenetrable Senate defenses faltered, then collapsed entirely as their fleet above was thrown into chaos. "Admiral," Lieutenant Ruiz's voice broke through the silence that had fallen on the bridge. "Xanthus is ours. The Senate's fleet is in full retreat." Voss allowed herself a brief victorious breath, but she knew the Senate wouldn't be gone forever. They would regroup, they would retaliate. But for now, humanity and their allies had won. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the bridge. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "This is just the beginning. We've shown the galaxy that the Senate is not invincible, and humanity will not be silenced. But we've also made enemies, powerful enemies. This fight is far from over." The crew fell silent, but Voss could feel their unity. The same fire, the same unbreakable will that had brought them here. They had fought for their right to exist in a galaxy that had long underestimated them. Now, they would fight to ensure that no power would ever threaten their freedom again. In the distance, the stars seemed to shine brighter than before. The Senate's retreat was a victory, but it was only a single chapter in a much larger war. The battle for Xanthus had become a symbol, a beacon to those who had long suffered under the Senate's rule. And as the Coalition's flag flew high above the newly liberated world, Voss knew that the galaxy was on the cusp of a new era. A new order was rising, one built not on fear and subjugation, but on unity, strength, and the unwavering belief that no force in the galaxy could ever crush the spirit of humanity. The war was far from over, but now humanity had a chance to lead, to inspire, and to carve their own path in the stars.